The words had barely left her mouth when he lunged in, voice sharpened with that familiar sneer, as though her sentence didn't matter. Sean Hannity didn't wait for Jasmine Crockett to finish. He cut her off mid-thought, his hand chopping the air, his tone dripping with mockery. "Oh, please, Congresswoman. Spare us the lecture," he barked, his interruption echoing with the kind of arrogance that's less about argument and more about domination. The studio air shifted. The chatter of producers stilled. The audience sat in suspended disbelief, their silence louder than any applause. Some blinked in shock, others tightened their jaws, because they knew what they had just witnessed was more than a breach of courtesy. It was a performance of power. Hannity's smirk widened, confident that he had seized control, certain the interruption would rattle her and reinforce his dominance. But the camera's eye betrayed him. It lingered on his face just long enough to magnify the condescension in his grin, the calculation in his stare. Then it cut to the Congresswoman. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. Her eyes narrowed, steady and unbroken, the way someone looks when they've seen this exact arrogance before, at a school board meeting, in a courtroom, in every room where a man mistook interruption for victory. Her silence, brief but piercing, was its own counterattack. Gasps rippled through the room like a wave, sharp whispers hissing between rows of seats. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward as though bracing for impact. The tension wasn't abstract. It was visceral, a collective recognition of something America has seen for centuries: the attempt to silence women at the very moment they speak their truth. This was no ordinary debate segment. It wasn't even about the policy detail that had been hanging in the air. It was about voice itself: who is allowed to finish, who is cut off, who is presumed too unworthy to be heard. Hannity may have thought it was just another interruption, just another flex of television power. But what he revealed, in that single reckless moment, was far bigger than him. Because the smirk on his face was the mask of an old story. And the stillness in her eyes was the signal that this story was about to turn. But no one in that studio, not even Hannity himself, was prepared for what Crockett would do next. It would be easy to dismiss the interruption as television drama, the kind of nightly sparring that fills cable news. But that moment was not small. It was not trivial. It was not just another clash over talking points. It was a mirror held up to the country, reflecting back a question far deeper than abortion rights alone: who gets to speak with authority in America, and who gets silenced mid-sentence? The confrontation carried a weight that stretched beyond the studio walls. Abortion rights, after all, are not an abstract policy dispute. They cut directly to questions of dignity, autonomy, and whose humanity is recognized in law. For millions watching, Hannity's interruption was not just rude, it was symbolic. It was the embodiment of every boardroom dismissal, every classroom interruption, every family dinner where a woman's voice was treated as expendable the moment it made a man uncomfortable. Crockett, in that instant, became more than herself. She became the stand-in for every woman told to lower her tone, every immigrant told to wait their turn, every citizen pushed to the margins of the national story. A montage flickers across the mind's eye. Kamala Harris interrupted mid-hearing, Hillary Clinton told to smile more, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez mocked for being too emotional. Each clip feeds into the next, a relentless archive of voices being cut short. And then, statistics. Polls revealing the anxiety gripping Americans after the fall of Roe v. Wade. The majority who fear rights once secure are slipping away. These are not isolated data points. They are the heartbeat of a nation where power tilts unevenly, where arrogance still tries to dictate who belongs at the microphone. And Hannity? He has built his empire on this tactic. The interruption is his weapon of choice. Again and again, guests have sat across from him, only to find their sentences hijacked, their reasoning drowned beneath the bluster of a man who knows the camera loves dominance. It is his brand. And yet, what he didn't anticipate that night was an opponent who refused to be bent, who let the interruption land but did not crumble under its weight. That's what makes this clash different. It's not merely about a single issue, though abortion rights hang heavy in the air. It's about narrative control itself, whether power belongs to the one who shouts loudest, or the one who holds steady when the shouting begins. Crockett's calm gaze, her sharpened silence, was more than composure. It was defiance. And that defiance is what transformed the moment into something larger, dignity standing tall against arrogance. Every viewer could feel it in their gut. This wasn't just television. This was the question of who America wants to be, unfolding in real time. And yet, this was only the beginning, because to understand the shock of what came next, you have to know who Sean Hannity really is. To understand why that interruption mattered, why it landed like a slap across the country, you have to know the man behind the smirk. Sean Hannity is not just another television host. He is an empire unto himself, a towering figure in conservative media, and for decades he has perfected a single art, dominance of the microphone. His method is not built on listening, or on exchanging ideas, but on cutting off, talking over, and overwhelming anyone who dares to sit across from him. From the beginning of his career, Hannity crafted a persona of the everyman patriot, the construction worker's son who rose to national prominence through sheer grit. But beneath that narrative lies a consistent strategy. Control the room, control the frame, and never let the other voice finish. His audiences have been trained to cheer this behavior. When he interrupts a progressive, when he mocks a woman leader, when he smirks at the camera as if to say I've already won, the crowd erupts. For years it worked. It made him untouchable. Clips play like a reel of arrogance. Hannity laughing over a young activist trying to explain healthcare reform. Hannity cutting Kamala Harris short with a wave of his hand. Hannity raising his voice over Senator Elizabeth Warren until her mic seemed irrelevant. Always the same formula: dismiss, interrupt, dominate. The audience applause was never about substance. It was about watching power in action, the satisfaction of seeing someone silenced before they could land their point. Yet with every performance of dominance, the cracks grew. Because arrogance, repeated too many times, begins to look tired. Viewers noticed the pattern, the avoidance of real debate, the refusal to engage with facts, the reliance on volume instead of logic. And outside his loyal base, the tactic breeds resentment. For many Americans, Hannity doesn't represent strength. He represents a bully with a spotlight, mistaking the size of his platform for the strength of his argument. His contradictions make the image even sharper. He paints himself as the champion of free speech, yet spends his airtime cutting off the very voices he invites. He calls for respect of American values, yet belittles women leaders, mocks immigrants, and sneers at anyone who challenges his worldview. He claims to fight for truth, yet shields those in power when their corruption aligns with his ideology. These contradictions don't weaken him in his own echo chamber, but they erode his standing in the broader public. They reveal a man more invested in control than in conversation. Behind the scenes, whispers of pressure mount. Ratings are harder to hold in a fragmented media landscape. Younger audiences, less tolerant of bullying tactics, tune out. Even among conservatives, some question whether the act is wearing thin. Hannity still commands power, yes, but it is power with a shadow, power that trembles at the possibility of being exposed as hollow. And that is why this moment, his interruption of Jasmine Crockett, carries such weight. It was not just another notch in his long history of domination. It was an act born of habit, of arrogance that assumed every guest would crumble, every opponent would be steamrolled. He had done it 1,000 times before and expected the same outcome again. But across from Hannity that night stood someone he fatally underestimated. Before the lights of Congress, before the cameras and microphones, before her name became known across the country, Jasmine Crockett's story was one of grit, persistence, and unyielding faith in her own voice. She wasn't born into privilege or handed a ready-made stage. Her journey was built brick by brick, through long nights of study, relentless community work, and a refusal to be told she did not belong. Growing up, Crockett knew what it meant to be underestimated. She saw how systems bent away from those without money, how institutions turned their backs on the vulnerable. Those experiences didn't harden her into cynicism. They sharpened her into steel wrapped in empathy. She learned quickly that dignity was not freely given, it had to be fought for. And so she chose her weapon carefully: law. In the courtroom, Crockett was relentless. Colleagues recall how she combined compassion with precision, standing up for clients who had no one else. Her words were not rehearsed theatrics. They were arrows of clarity, cutting through obfuscation with a force that made juries lean forward and judges pause. She didn't win by outshouting opponents, she won by outlasting them, by laying out truths so undeniably that resistance collapsed under its own weakness. The community saw it. Those living on the margins, families threatened with eviction, workers dismissed without cause, young people ensnared in a justice system that too often felt stacked against them, found in Crockett a defender who would not look away. Her office became a sanctuary where the unheard were not only listened to but armed with voice. It was this credibility, earned in the trenches, that propelled her into politics. She did not ascend because of dynastic power or insider deals. She ascended because people recognized authenticity when they saw it. They recognized in her the rare combination of heart and fire, someone who could sit at your kitchen table one day and hold her ground in the halls of power the next. When Crockett took her seat in Congress, she carried that same energy into hearings and debates. Clips began to circulate, her dismantling a witness who tried to evade accountability, her fiery but dignified exchanges with colleagues who underestimated her, her steady presence in moments of chaos. In every instance, she did not simply argue. She reframed the room. She made those watching feel that their dignity was tied to hers, that her fight was not abstract but lived and personal. This is what separates her from so many others who walk the marble floors of Washington. Crockett is not a politician who performs empathy for applause. She embodies it because she has lived it. She is not a leader who uses fire to grandstand. She channels it with precision, wielding passion as both shield and sword. And when she raises her voice, it carries the weight of 1,000 silenced voices behind it. To see Jasmine Crockett face Hannity that night was to see all of this history standing in one place. She was not simply a congresswoman at a news desk. She was the child who had been told no, the lawyer who had stood up for the dismissed, the woman who had been interrupted 100 times before and learned that silence, strategically held, can be more devastating than noise. She was not rattled by arrogance because arrogance had met her many times and never broken her. She was not silenced by interruption because interruption had always been the background music of her journey. Every dismissal, every challenge, every uphill climb had built her for confrontation, not the reckless confrontation of bluster, but the dignified confrontation of someone who knows exactly who she is. That is why when Hannity leaned forward and cut her off, she did not falter. Her past had already trained her for that moment. She carried into that studio the weight of her battles, the memory of her victories, and the certainty that dignity outlasts arrogance. And that past, every courtroom, every debate, every dismissal she endured, had prepared her for this exact moment. The exchange did not cool after Hannity's first interruption. If anything, it ignited him further. He leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting, his voice carrying the smug rhythm of someone who believed he was untouchable. A mocking chuckle slipped out, as though Crockett's words were less than serious, less than deserving of real consideration. He waved his hand dismissively, punctuating his laughter with a shrug that said, "I own this stage." He had done it 1,000 times before: mock, interrupt, control. And in those past encounters, the tactic had worked. But this time, there was something different. Crockett didn't rise to the bait. She didn't scramble to shout louder or push her way into the noise. Instead, she let him talk. She let him fill the air with condescension, his laughter echoing a little too long, his sentences swelling with self-satisfaction. Every second he spoke, the room's patience thinned, and the arrogance on display became more obvious. Her composure became the real story. She sat still, her gaze fixed on him with a calmness that unsettled. The silence between her breaths carried more weight than his booming voice. It was the patience of someone who knew that arrogance always overplays itself. And then, almost imperceptibly, the rhythm began to shift. Crockett leaned forward, not to interrupt but to redirect. With a measured voice, she asked him a question, sharp, precise, and impossible to swat away with a laugh. Hannity blinked, momentarily off balance, before attempting to bulldoze his way through. But the ground had shifted. With each calm inquiry, she repositioned the debate, transforming herself from the guest under attack to the conductor of the conversation. The cracks began to show. Hannity's voice grew louder, as though volume might restore the authority slipping from his hands. He started speaking faster, piling words on top of each other in a rush to stay ahead. Nervous chuckles replaced confident smirks. His sentences faltered at their ends, landing with less conviction than when he began. Crockett never raised her tone. She didn't need to. Her strategy was discipline, the discipline of someone who had faced arrogance too many times to be rattled. Each question she asked, each calm rebuttal she delivered, pulled Hannity further into his own trap. His interruptions, once a weapon, now revealed desperation. The audience could sense it. The mighty host, the master of interruption, was losing control of the very format he had mastered. Tension thickened in the room. Every time Hannity tried to reassert dominance, Crockett's steady calm stripped the bluster of its power. Viewers watching felt the suspense coil tighter, knowing instinctively that something was coming. The imbalance was reaching its breaking point, the silence between her words beginning to feel like the drumbeat before a strike. And then, with the entire studio holding its breath, she struck back. The room seemed to hold its breath. Hannity, confident just seconds before, had no idea that the moment was about to turn. Crockett leaned forward, her hands folded calmly, her voice measured but unwavering. She began not with theatrics, not with outrage, but with evidence, a carefully constructed argument that left no room for misdirection. Constitutional precedent, historical rulings, statistics about public health and safety, and a moral clarity that cut through every smirk and interruption he tried to throw her way. Hannity attempted to interrupt, a nervous chuckle rising in his throat, but Crockett's delivery was unyielding. Each point landed like a hammer striking steel, each fact a counterweight to his bluster. He barked over her at one moment, trying to regain control, but the audience could see the cracks forming in real time. His interruptions, once lethal, now looked like grasping at air. Every word he tried to force into the room fell flat against her composure, her command of the facts, her presence. She reframed the debate entirely. This was no longer a discussion about polling numbers or partisan talking points. This was about freedom. About dignity. About the consistency of the Constitution. She tied the right to abortion to the broader principles Americans claim to hold dear. The right to make decisions about one's own body, the right to privacy, the right to live without the arbitrary interference of those who wield power carelessly. Hannity tried to counter, but the very framework he had relied on, his certainty, his arrogance, his audience's applause, was now turned against him. Every attempt to belittle her argument only amplified the power of her words. The gasps began almost immediately. The live audience shifted, some leaning forward, some exhaling in disbelief. Social media erupted. Clips of her responses began to spread even as the broadcast continued, hashtags forming like sparks in a tinderbox. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag dignity over arrogance, hashtag voice unstoppable. Silence stretched and snapped in the studio, punctuated only by Hannity's increasingly desperate attempts to interject. He faltered. His words stammered. His confidence, carefully cultivated over decades, crumbled under the weight of clarity and truth. He shifted in his chair, laughter now nervous, posture defensive, trapped in the contradictions he had tried to hide with interruptions and bluster. For the first time, he wasn't leading the conversation. He was reacting to it, struggling to regain footing on a terrain he no longer controlled. And then she delivered it, the line that would define the night. Not shouted, not dramatized, but stated with a calm authority that left no doubt. It reframed the frame itself. Hannity was no longer the center of power, no longer the one controlling the narrative. She had turned the mirror back on him. Every viewer could see it, the interruption, the smirk, the bluster, all irrelevant in the face of reason, courage, and clarity. She had not just rebutted him. She had rewritten the room, and in that instant, the reversal was complete. The audience could feel it ripple through the studio. Twitter ignited. Commentators scrambled for words. Hannity's allies searched for explanations. The room, the nation, and the screens across the country collectively exhaled, stunned by the precision, the poise, the unrelenting force of truth delivered by Crockett. And yet, even as applause and shock waves collided in every corner of the media, one thing became clear: this was not just a single moment of victory. This was a seismic shift. The narrative, once tightly held by arrogance and interruption, had been unmoored, replaced with clarity and authority. Every viewer who had watched felt the pulse of something larger than themselves, a reminder that courage, preparation, and dignity can overcome the loudest voices in the room. And just when it seemed Hannity was finished, the shockwaves began to spread far beyond the studio. The moment Crockett reversed the frame did not fade with the studio lights. It exploded outward. Within minutes, clips of the exchange flooded social media. Commentators across networks were visibly stunned, struggling to articulate what had just occurred. Their voices, usually confident and rehearsed, cracked with disbelief as they replayed the calm dismantling of Hannity's bluster. #CrockettClapback trending so fast that the hashtag itself became shorthand for dignity and precision, a rallying cry for viewers who had long felt silenced or ignored. Rival politicians, allies, and pundits scrambled to weigh in, some offering muted praise, others awkwardly pivoting to unrelated topics. They could not deny the optics. Crockett had seized control of the narrative, and held it with unshakable authority. Hannity's usual allies, the commentators and supporters who had long reinforced his dominance, now shifted in real time, attempting to reframe the narrative, to soften the sting, to convince audiences that it had been a minor slip. But the evidence was irrefutable. The silence of the studio had been deafening, and the moment had already gone viral. Ordinary people joined in with a fervor that no network could manufacture. TikToks recounted the exchange with captions that celebrated Crockett's composure. Memes circulated, framing the reversal as a triumph of reason over arrogance, dignity over intimidation. From kitchen tables to classrooms, from community centers to offices, viewers discussed what they had witnessed, recognizing in Crockett a reflection of the courage they themselves had struggled to summon. People felt represented, empowered, and validated in a way that transcended politics. The ripple extended further. News cycles spun the clip into analysis, op-eds dissected the implications, podcasts replayed it, and streaming platforms highlighted the moment as one of the most compelling political confrontations of the year. Every replay reinforced the narrative: arrogance could be confronted, and control of the conversation could be seized with calm, preparation, and moral clarity. The cultural resonance was undeniable. This was not simply a debate moment. It was a collective awakening, a reminder that a single person, armed with truth and dignity, could upend a structure designed to silence. Viewers did not just watch, they felt it. They felt vindication in a world that often prioritizes volume over reason. They felt collective energy, the shared thrill of witnessing someone finally stand tall against a long-entrenched figure. They felt the quiet triumph of morality asserting itself in a space too often dominated by ego. The energy spread, almost like electricity, connecting strangers across cities and states, uniting them in admiration for a moment that had been both immediate and profoundly symbolic. In newsrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms alike, the question on everyone's mind was no longer, could she defend her point? It had become, what happens next? The reverberations were larger than any network could measure, larger than ratings or social influence. This moment had shifted the ground beneath the usual hierarchy of debate and control, proving that preparation, integrity, and courage could disrupt even the most fortified stage. But the most surprising transformation wasn't America's reaction, it was Hannity himself. As the dust settled and the cameras faded from the live broadcast, Crockett did not retreat into victory laps or self-congratulation. Instead, she reframed the confrontation, speaking to the deeper truth that had driven her from the very beginning: this was never just politics. It was about human dignity, about freedom, about the fundamental principle that every voice deserves to be heard, no matter how powerful the opposition may seem. She reminded viewers that abortion rights, like so many civil liberties, are not abstract concepts. They are extensions of personal autonomy, of the right to make choices about one's own life, body, and future. To protect those rights is to defend liberty itself. It is to insist, with unwavering clarity, that fairness and justice are not privileges reserved for the loudest, the richest, or the most entitled, but inalienable qualities that belong to everyone. Crockett's words resonated because they connected the immediate drama to universal truths. She framed the debate not as a victory over one man, but as a reaffirmation of the principles that bind a society together: equality, accountability, and moral responsibility. Every interruption she had endured, every attempt to silence her voice, had strengthened the conviction that dignity must always triumph over arrogance. Her calm authority, her precise reasoning, and her refusal to bend under pressure became a masterclass in moral courage, a lesson for anyone who has ever been dismissed or disregarded. This was not simply a clash between a congresswoman and a pundit. It was a turning point in narrative power, a demonstration that truth and preparation can outlast bluster and intimidation. Crockett's example became a touchstone, reminding Americans that courage is not measured by volume or aggression, but by steadfastness, clarity, and the commitment to stand tall even when the stakes are highest. The inspirational crescendo was unmistakable. Viewers felt pride, not just for the woman on the stage, but for themselves, for their shared values, for a society capable of recognizing and rewarding dignity in action. The confrontation became a symbol, a narrative they could carry forward, proof that the arc of conversation bends toward respect when the force of arrogance meets the steel of principle. In the quiet aftermath, as social media continued to buzz and commentators replayed her words, the real lesson emerged: lasting change does not come from shouting louder or dominating a room. It comes from steadfast clarity, moral courage, and the courage to assert one's voice in the face of repeated attempts to silence it. Crockett's moment on air was both personal and universal, a reminder that voices grounded in dignity can shift the culture, influence the conversation, and inspire generations. And that's why this moment still echoes today. Hannity had thought the moment was his. He leaned in, cut her off, smirked at the camera, certain he had asserted control. But seconds later, Jasmine Crockett reversed the frame. The arrogance that had dominated the room moments before now faltered, replaced by clarity, composure, and undeniable moral authority. The country watched, riveted, as one woman's dignity reshaped the narrative, leaving even the most confident pundit visibly shaken. This is the moment to remember. Not because of spectacle, not because of confrontation, but because it shows what happens when preparation, courage, and principle meet arrogance head-on. Every viewer who witnessed it could feel the empowerment, that standing firm, speaking truth, and demanding to be heard can shift the conversation, inspire others, and remind the world that dignity is not negotiable. If you believe in the power of voices like Crockett's, don't let this moment fade. Share it, discuss it, and let it inspire others. Subscribe, follow, and keep this story alive, because the impact of courage spreads fastest when it is carried forward by those who witness it and refuse to stay silent. The final image lingers, Crockett standing tall, calm but resolute, the studio applause fading into a heartbeat, the quiet reminder that authority rooted in dignity cannot be easily undone. Every time someone tries to silence truth, this moment stands as proof that voice, courage, and preparation can prevail. Because the next time arrogance tries to silence dignity, we'll all remember what happened here.